Okay, I'm back and hopefully my nose is fixed. Anyway, this article, which I found on the website of Canada's probably second largest newspaper, the Globe and Mail, tries to put the Canadian refugee crisis into its international perspective, where of course it should always be put. Since Canada definitely does not exist in a vacuum in the world, not even in North America, but is highly dependent on various other countries, not the least the United States. Colin Robertson contributed this article to the Globe and Mail originally on September the 1st, 2015, and he updated it, or someone else updated it, on May the 15th, 2018. There are desperate people taking desperate measures as they flee war, persecution, and poverty. They endure abuse, starvation, and for the unlucky death in their search for asylum. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees estimates that 60 million displaced people or persons are on the move. Each day, an additional 42,500 people are forced to leave their homes. The flows, the most since the mass displacements after the Second World War, are global. The number of European migrants increased by 51% in 2014 through Turkey, the world's top refugee hosting country, across the Mediterranean and within Ukraine. The number of Asian migrants is up by 31%, with Iran and Pakistan in the top 4 refugee receiving nations. Displacement in the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa is up by 18%. Ethiopia is now the top African host nation. The numbers from the Americas are up by 12% because of the 6 million still displaced within Colombia. Refugee claims are up by 44% in the United States as a result of the increased flow from Central America. There are 14.4 million refugees, those defined as having a well-founded fear of persecution, who are protected by international law. Where do they go? Few countries participate in the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees program that resettles about 100,000 refugees each year. The United States takes the most. Canada has agreed to resettle 14,500 refugees as part of an intake of 285,000 immigrants this year. So probably talking about 2015. And then Prime Minister of Canada and then leader of the Canadian Conservative Party, Stephen Harper, had promised to accept 10,000 refugees from Syria and Iraq from 2015 to 2019. However, critics noted that Canada's capacity to process these refugee applications would have to be improved if Canada was to meet the pledge of 10,000 over the years 2015 to 2018. Warning that refugee policy alone will not solve the problem, Prime Minister Harper said that Canadians would have to stop Islamic State. The military is a part of the solution, not just in battling Islamic State, but as first responders on land and sea and as peacekeepers. Describing the arrival of the displaced as a gigantic challenge for the European Union, the German Federal Chancellor, or Prime Minister Angela Merkel, pledged no tolerance for those people who questioned the dignity of others. It was a subtle rebuke to then Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, who described the displaced in Calais, north eastern France, as a swarm. For David Miliband, a Labour Party politician, the former British Foreign Secretary, who was then heading the International Rescue Committee, The solution would require attention both upstream and downstream. Upstream, the army must contain the conflict with humanitarian relief for the displaced, while diplomacy works to resolve the conflict. Downstream, the challenge is to share the burden. And this means quickly determining who is a bona fide or good faith refugee, in other words, a person who honestly is in danger of losing his or her life or personal liberty or health as a result of persecution, rather than an economic migrant who just wants to benefit financially. It requires police and intelligence collaboration to curb the human traffickers. Failure to address the upstream will overwhelm the downstream. As a first step, Mr. Miliband says the international community must help those states on the edges of conflict zones with their growing humanitarian burden. And this, of course, requires money. The Syrian refugee program has received, or had received, probably as of September 2000 or August 2015, under a quarter of its 4.53 billion Canadian dollar request. Canada could do more. The next government should launch an energetic appeal matching private and government giving. While the federal government must lead, provincial and municipal governments have a role. In the aftermath of the Indo-Chinese boat people crisis, then Mayor of Ottawa, Marion Dewar, launched Project 4000 in June 1979 to help resettle 4,000 of the 8,000 refugees who Canada had agreed to take. Her initiative galvanized the country. Then Prime Minister Joe Clark's minority government raised Canada's intake to 50,000. Canada would eventually settle more than 60,000 refugees. The moral case for saving desperate people fleeing for their lives is clear. So is the realpolitik, or realistic political recognition, that inaction only compounds a human tragedy that eventually may wind up on our own shores.